Ed Gonzalez, Harris County Sheriff. We have four confirmed adult people deceased inside the residence. What we know at this time is that approximately 3:15 a.m., Precinct 3 deputy constables received a call regarding a female that had possibly been shot here at the location. Upon their arrival, they tried to ascertain what was going on. At that point, they were met with gunfire. They did not exchange gunfire, and none of the Precinct 3 deputy constables were injured. At that point, our SWAT team from the Harris County Sheriff's Office was called out to the location. A perimeter was set. They did engage in some conversations back and forth with a possible suspect or a person involved in what was going on inside, non-cooperative in terms of coming out. We did learn through the investigation that was ongoing and dynamic at the time that there were possibly other occupants inside the house. And upon uh, negotiations and other operations that we conducted out here, we finally were able to gain entry when we heard a final gunshot. When upon making entry, our SWAT team discovered two adult females and two adult males. We believe that one of the males was the suspect or the possible suspect that we were focused on as a target of our scene investigation out here. It's our understanding that the adult suspect, a black male, 49 years of age, was in a dating relationship. At least what we understand early on is that it's probably a boyfriend girlfriend type situation. Again, another domestic violence situation once again. And the other two are adult children, possibly of the female. I understand that the male may have younger children, but we were able to verify that they were not here at the residence and no harm was committed to them as far as we know. So at this point, that's what we have right now. Now we're moving on to the scene investigation. The Harris County Sheriff's Office, as is standard procedure, will make the scene and conduct now a scene investigation. And all of this is still preliminary. I'm sure you'll probably ask if there's been a history of calls here to the location. We don't have any reported calls to this location. It appears that the female is the one that called and said that she may have been injured by a gunshot. And so we're going to have to piece together and look at the timeline of what occurred out here. But at this point, it appears that the male that finally ultimately appears to have died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound was most likely the aggressor, but we don't know that. That's still preliminary. Um, it's possible that she may have played a role somehow or shot. We don't know the timeline in terms of where shots were fired. We also believe that the individuals inside were shot prior to our arrival. The initial shots that were fired towards the deputies were the only shots that were heard during our interactions. And then ultimately, the final shot was the self-inflicted gunshot wound that the male took. We gave him every opportunity to surrender safely. We tried different ways of communicating with him to no avail. So our condolences go out to the family members of those that have lost loved ones out here. It's always tragic, especially during the holidays. We see these type of situations, and unfortunately, it wasn't a successful outcome, for the family. But very proud of the collaboration out here, the EMS and everybody that was on standby here to assist. And again, unfortunately, one more, as we reach the end of the year, another tragic situation, multiple lives lost, and that's how difficult these cases can be. Is that it could really turn people's lives around, and so it's very very sad. Yeah, I've seen way too many of these situations throughout my career. I remember it's still stamped in my memory last year on Christmas Eve when I responded to a scene where a female was shot and killed by an ex-boyfriend. And so we see the different dynamics, but at the end of the day, it's at the hands of a loved one or supposed loved one and an intimate partner, as we see preliminary that's what occurred once again. And again, we see also how this could escalate, where it's not only a murder suicide, if you will, but others that are can lose their lives as well. That's why these are always so difficult for not only law enforcement, but for those involved in those dynamics. That's why we always remind people to use resources that are out there. We said at the beginning of the pandemic that we expected the pandemic to not cause more domestic violence because it's already out there, but it was going to be amplified more with more stressors. It tends to happen as well during the holidays. just due to different emotions, and there's a lot of stressors going on, and so that's an example of what we appear to have here today.
Sure. I know it's too early to tell as far as the motive goes, but I can imagine it's tricky with the suspect being dead as well as three other people. Talk a little bit about that and how you might come about trying to figure that out.
Yeah, basically what we'll do is try to gain as much intelligence, talking to family members and others, and try to gain some information of what happened. There may have been maybe some ongoing disputes recently between the couple. We don't know that, and unfortunately here tonight it all came to an end. And so again, our condolences go out to the family. At the end of the day, we try to piece it as best as we can and kind of put the puzzle back together, but we may not have all the answers. But again, a sad situation here in East Harris County.
Sir, is this going to be the shots that were shot when the hospital got here? Is there any possible way that those were the shots that killed the other individuals, or you have think that there were shots before even the hospital got here?
Ultimately, the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences will get out here to kind of do the medical investigative part of it, so I don't want to speak out of line. So what I'm saying, it's just a caveat that, I'm not the medical expert, and we're just giving, based on a cursory look, it appears that the individuals had already been shot prior to even the first deputy's arrival, and so that's what it appears like. Again, no shots were heard after that. It appears that when they tried to enter the doorway is when the shots were fired towards them. That's why they immediately retreated. So I'm glad no deputies were hurt, because it could have been a lot worse. He did fire, somebody fired towards the doorway. So those were the only shots that were fired. During that time, when the perimeter was set and then ultimately SWAT came out here, there were no other reported shots. So we believe that the crimes had already been committed prior to that. So we believe the shots were directed towards the deputies.
And Sheriff, the four people that were victims here, did they all live there? Were they there visiting, a couple of them? Can you speak to that?
I'm not sure the dynamics of the others. Again, preliminary, it appears that the couple lived here. I don't know if they're her adult children, so we were told if they lived here as well or they were just visiting. We haven't determined that yet, but again, it's two adults, two females. He's 49 years old, and they're adult children, and then they're two adults, two females, and so that's what we have right now. So we don't know, again, what their connection was to the house or to him, or if those were her adult children. We just don't know yet.
And talk to us about the communication. You said he was being uncooperative. What was he saying?
Well, there were times when he would pick up the phone and talk to some of our support team members out here and have conversations, but it was very short. It was never a sustained communication, which isn't always, sometimes we were able to make contact, other times we're not. At this point, there was some communication back and forth throughout these last few hours, but nothing successful where he ultimately was ready to surrender or come out or allow for us to be able to get in there and safely be able to render aid. And so, all those are part of our strategies, and we try to give them different options. At the end of the day, we want them to know above everything that we're here to try to minimize, any consequences or damage or anything like that. But at the end of the day, it's up to the individual to ultimately make a decision of how the situation is going to unfold. And sadly, he had already made some grave choices in what appears to, again, appearing preliminary that again, without assuming, but it appears that he was the aggressor, and we don't know if she shot back at him or anything like that. He did report having a wound initially, but ultimately the self-inflicted gunshot wound is what ultimately appears to have killed him.
Was he using a long gun or a pistol? Do we know?
I saw just a cursory look early on. It appears that there were at least a couple weapons inside the house in plain view, and it appears that one of them was a long gun.